Ladies and gentlemen, listen carefully to this truth, because it is one of the most painful truths in human life. Size. People rarely understand what you meant to them while they still have you. They do not measure your worth in the moment you are available. They do not respect your heart when it is freely given. They do not always treasure the warmth of your presence while you are standing right in front of them. No. Many people only discover your value after your distance becomes impossible to ignore. Pause. And that is when the regret begins. Not the loud regret that asks for attention, not the dramatic regret that announces itself with tears and promises. I am speaking about the quiet regret, the deep regret, the regret that sits in the chest like a stone and never fully leaves. The kind of regret that arrives late at night when the world is silent and the mind can no longer hide from the truth. The kind of regret that whispers, "You were there all along, and I did not understand what I was losing." This is how human beings are often built. We grow comfortable with what is constant. We become careless with what is familiar. We assume that the person who always shows up will always stay. We assume that love will remain even when we neglect it. We assume that patience has no limit. We assume that kindness will wait forever. But life does not reward this kind of blindness. Life teaches through absence. Life teaches through loss. Life teaches through the unbearable silence that follows when someone finally stops offering what was never appreciated. Your distance is not just physical, it is emotional. It is spiritual. It is the moment your energy no longer bends itself to people who cannot meet you with equal sincerity. It is the moment you stop begging to be chosen. It is the moment you stop over-explaining your heart to those who never listened. It is the moment you begin to understand that love without respect becomes self-betrayal. And when that distance begins, something powerful happens in the psychology of the other person. What they ignored starts to echo. What they dismissed starts to haunt them. What they took for granted begins to feel precious only because it is no longer available. That is the tragedy of human nature. We often do not awaken through gain. We awaken through loss. And loss has a way of revealing what pride tries to conceal. When you were near, they may have seen you as dependable, predictable, always there, always understanding, always forgiving. They may have treated your presence like background music, something so constant that it faded into the air. They may have confused your loyalty for weakness. They may have mistaken your silence for absence of feeling. They may have believed that because you were kind, you were easy to keep. But distance changes the psychology of attachment. Distance strips away comfort. Distance removes the illusion of certainty. Distance makes people confront the emotional space they use to fill with assumptions, and once that space opens, regret enters. People begin to remember your voice. They begin to remember the way you listened when others did not. They begin to remember how safe they felt around you, even if they never said it. They begin to remember your patience, your loyalty, your depth, your rare way of caring, without demanding a performance in return. They begin to remember that you were not ordinary. You were not replaceable. You were not just another name in their life. You were the one person who made their world feel emotionally stable, and they did not value it when they had it. There is a dark irony in human relationships. Some people do not love deeply until they are forced to lose deeply. Your distance becomes their biggest regret because it removes the noise that protected them from the truth. While you were always near, they could postpone realization. They could delay gratitude. They could tell themselves they had time, but when you withdrew your energy, they could no longer hide behind comfort. They had to face the emptiness your absence created. They had to face the reality that your presence had been holding something together in their life that they never noticed. And now they remember. They remember how your care made their burdens lighter. They remember how your attention made them feel seen. They remember how your silence once protected them from chaos. They remember how your faith in them gave them strength when they had none. They remember the times you stood beside them without asking for applause. They remember the times you gave them understanding when they offered you confusion. They remember it all, but remembrance is not the same as appreciation, and that is where the pain becomes unbearable. Because remembering too late is a form of suffering. A person can survive many things, but one of the hardest lessons is realizing that what you neglected was exactly what you needed. This is why distance is so powerful. Distance reveals character. Distance exposes priorities. Distance uncovers the truth about who truly valued you and who merely enjoyed having you around. It shows whether someone loved the person you are or only loved the convenience you provided. And when you step away, you become a question they cannot answer. Where did you go? Why are you no longer available? Why does everything feel colder now? Why does the room feel emptier without you? Why does your silence feel louder than your words ever did? These are the questions regret asks in the dark. People rarely understand the full meaning of your presence until they are forced to live with your absence. They thought your distance would be temporary. They thought you would come back as you always did. They thought your heart would remain open no matter how carelessly they behaved. They thought your forgiveness had no boundary. They thought your patience was endless. They thought your love was something they could keep spending without ever replenishing. But every soul has a limit. Every heart has a breaking point. Every self-respecting person eventually reaches the moment where pain becomes clearer than hope. And when that moment arrives, distance is not punishment. Distance is truth. It says, I can no longer continue where I am unseen. It says, I can no longer overgive to people who underappreciate. It says, I can no longer live as an option in someone else's life while I make them a priority in mine. That is why your withdrawal has power. Not because it is cold, but because it is honest. Not because it is revenge, but because it is self-respect. Not because it is meant to wound, but because it is meant to restore your inner order. Yet even when your distance begins from a place of healing, it can become the very thing that awakens another person's deepest regret. Because now they must feel what they once ignored. Now they must face the emotional cost of their inattentiveness. Now they must confront the memory of your loyalty. Now they must ask themselves why they only recognized your worth after losing access to you. And here is the hard truth. Many people do not regret losing you because they suddenly became noble. They regret losing you because your absence created a void they can no longer comfortably ignore. This is the psychological wound of regret. It is not just sadness. It is the realization that the opportunity was present, but the mind was elsewhere. The chance was real, but the heart was careless. The blessing was in front of them, but they were too distracted, too proud, too immature, or too emotionally asleep to see it, and now the blessing is gone, and the lesson has arrived too late to be useful. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something that many people spend years trying to understand. Not everyone who loses you will deserve the pain of that loss, but many will still have to live with it. They will have to sit in the silence they created. They will have to remember the conversations they didn't value. They will have to feel the emptiness where your warmth used to be. They will have to understand, perhaps for the first time, that love is not only about having someone, it is about honoring them while they are there. Your distance teaches what your presence could not. Your silence becomes a teacher. Your absence becomes a mirror. Your withdrawal becomes a verdict on everything they failed to do. And that is why people change only after you leave, because your leaving makes the invisible visible. Your leaving turns emotional laziness into pain. Your leaving transforms assumptions into regret. Your leaving forces the heart to ask the question it avoided for too long. What if I had treated this person with the reverence they deserved? That question can haunt a person for years. Some will try to mask it. They will pretend they are fine. They will distract themselves with noise, with new people, with shallow comfort, with endless activity. They will tell themselves that the past is the past, and that they are better off without you. But the heart does not always agree with the mouth. The unconscious keeps receipts. It keeps every neglected moment. It keeps every unspoken apology. It keeps every memory of how you looked at them with sincerity when they were not worthy of it. And in the quiet hours, those receipts are opened. That is when regret becomes unbearable. Not every person will return. Not every person will confess. Not every person will admit what you meant to them. Some will carry their regret in silence until the end of their days. Some will watch from a distance and say nothing. Some will come close and still not have enough courage to be honest. Some will reach for you only after realizing they cannot replace what they lost. But by then, your distance has already done its work. It has already revealed the truth. It has already separated fantasy from reality. And perhaps that is the most powerful part of your story. You did not need to shout to be felt. You did not need to beg to be remembered. You did not need to destroy anyone to prove your worth. You simply stepped back, and in that space, reality began to speak louder than pride. That is what distance does. It speaks in a language regret understands. It tells people you had something real. It tells them you did not see it because you were too familiar with it. It tells them, now that it is gone, you finally understand what it cost you. There are people who will never admit this publicly, but they know the truth privately. They know there was someone in their life whose consistency was a gift. They know there was someone whose love was not dramatic but deep. They know there was someone who never played games with their heart. They know there was someone who offered loyalty in a world full of performance. They know there was someone who stayed genuine while they were still learning how to value authenticity. And they know, deep inside, that they lost more than they were prepared to lose. That is why your distance becomes unforgettable, because it does not merely end access. It changes perception. Before distance, they saw you as someone who would always be there. After distance, they see you as the one they should have treasured. Before distance, they believed time was on their side. After distance, they realized time was the very thing they wasted. Before distance, they thought your softness meant you would endure everything. After distance, they understand that even the softest heart can choose peace over pain. And this is the lesson for every soul listening now. Never confuse availability with infinite tolerance. Never confuse kindness with permission. Never confuse loyalty with lack of standards. Never confuse emotional patience with emotional emptiness. The people who carry the deepest hearts are often the ones who leave the quietest, and their silence can be more devastating than any argument ever could. Because when a person like that goes, they do not leave chaos behind. They leave clarity. Clarity is painful. It shows people what they had. It shows people what they lost. It shows people how they behaved. It shows people what they will never receive again in exactly the same form. And that is why regret grows in the shadow of your absence. It grows not from what you did, but from what they failed to appreciate. It grows from missed chances. It grows from neglected moments. It grows from emotional laziness. It grows from the foolish belief that true love will keep forgiving forever. It grows from the shock of discovering that some hearts, once wounded enough, do not return to the same place again. Do you understand the seriousness of this? A person can lose money and recover. A person can lose time and still rebuild. A person can lose opportunities and find new ones. But when they lose the kind of presence that made them feel deeply understood, the kind of love that made them feel safe, the kind of soul that stayed consistent in an inconsistent world, the loss touches a different part of their being. It touches identity. It touches memory. It touches conscience. It touches the place inside them that knows the truth even when they refuse to say it aloud. And so they live with the regret of your distance. They replay moments in their mind. They remember the way you tried. They remember the moments they shrugged off. They remember the affection they treated as ordinary. They remember the trust they did not protect. They remember the patience they tested. They remember the line they crossed. And then, in the stillness, they realize the truth too late. You were never the problem. Their inability to value what was real was the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, there is dignity in being the one who finally walks away. There is dignity in no longer fighting to be seen by people committed to looking away. There is dignity in letting your absence answer the questions your words were never allowed to resolve. There is dignity in choosing peace when the environment around you only rewards neglect. And sometimes, the greatest lesson you give to others is not through your presence, but through the lesson of your departure. When you leave, you become unforgettable, not because you tried to be, but because the contrast is impossible to ignore. The conversation becomes quieter, the room becomes emptier, the day becomes heavier, the heart becomes more aware, and the mind begins to say over and over again, "We had something valuable, and we did not handle it well." This is regret. Not a single moment, but a long awakening. Not a dramatic collapse, but a slow realization. Not a punishment from outside, but a truth from within. That is why I tell you, never underestimate the power of distance when it is born from self-respect. Never underestimate the spiritual force of stepping back from what depletes you. Never underestimate how deeply silence can speak when it is no longer used to protect someone else's comfort. Your distance may be the very thing that forces the world to see you correctly. And sometimes, that is the only way they ever will. They will not always celebrate your value while they are still close enough to touch it. They will not always say the words when they should. They will not always rise to the level of your heart. But they will remember. Oh yes, they will remember. They will remember in the moments when pride has gone quiet. They will remember in the hours when the mind cannot escape what the heart has lost. They will remember when every replacement feels cheap. They will remember when every new connection feels shallow. They will remember when your absence becomes louder than their excuses. That is the biggest regret of all. Not that you left. Not that distance came. But that they finally saw your worth only after your presence became a memory. So stand in your distance with strength. Stand in your silence with dignity. Stand in your truth without apology, because the heart that is truly yours should never require you to shrink, chase, beg, or disappear into someone else's neglect. And if your absence teaches them something profound, let it teach this. Some people are not lost because they left too soon, but because they stayed long enough to be taken for granted. And when they realize that, it may already be too late. That is the burden of regret. That is the cost of delay. That is the lesson your distance leaves behind. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why your distance becomes their biggest regret.